Dear friends, I'm going to show you how to read SQL data into Pandas data frame and then how to write data frame back to SQL database. For this tutorial, I have this two SQL table, customers and orders. And what we are going to do is read these tables into a data frame and then write it back. As usual, I have a Jupyter notebook where I have imported Pandas and SQL Alchemy modules. If you don't have SQL Alchemy installed, then you can run pip install SQL Alchemy and that will install it for you. One more thing you need to install is PyMySQL. So pip install PyMySQL. So make sure you install these two modules before continuing on this tutorial. So the first thing we are doing here is creating SQL Alchemy engine by using create engine method. Now the format of the connection string is that the first part is this fixed string, which is for MySQL along with PyMySQL Python module. Then you have the username colon password. My password here is blank. That's why I didn't put anything here. Then then you have the host colon port and then your database name. Now I have SQL Workbench where you can see I have this application database and that has customers and orders tables, and you can see some sample records which I already pre-populated in these two tables. Now I'm using MySQL database here. You can use this tutorial to interface with Oracle, Postgres, or any other database. The sample string, the connection string here would change if you're using a different database. So those things are documented on Pandas documentation here. You can see that if you're using Oracle, then you will use this format. If you're using Postgres, then here is the format that you need to use. Okay, so let's get started. And the first thing I will do is this customers table that I have, I will read that into a data frame. So for that, the method you would use is read SQL table. So in read SQL table, the parameter that you need to give is the table name. Now it says it is missing the parameter. Yes, so you need to pass the engine here which you created here, and then you will get the data frame which has your customer table populated. Okay, now sometimes you want to read only few columns. Let's say I want to read only name and phone number. I don't want to read ID. In that case, this function has columns parameter, and if you want to read the arguments that this function supports, you can click on shift tab. That will show you the arguments. So here I have columns argument, and if you read the documentation, it will say the list of columns to select from SQL table. So here I will say name and phone number, and you can see it just read those two columns. Okay, so you can select any number of columns that you want. Now the next thing that we'll do is we will join customers and orders table and we'll read that into a data frame. So for example, the query that I wrote here is to select the fields in customers and orders table, and then I have joined them using the foreign key which was customer ID. And when I run this query in my SQL Workbench, I get this combined data between customers and order. Okay, so what I want to do is now the same data I want to read into Pandas data frame. So for that, you will use read SQL query method. Okay, and then the first parameter is the query itself. So let me define that query here. So I will just copy the query from here, and then that query would go here, and the second parameter is the SQL engine. When you execute this, what it does internally, it will execute this query, this engine, and then the result it will load into a data frame. Now this query is pretty simple. If you have a lot of records to read, then you can use the chunk size or argument to read the records in batches. So if you read the documentation of read SQL query here, one of the arguments is chunk size. If you use that, then you will be able to load a huge amount of data into batches. Okay, so that might be useful sometimes based on the size of the data that you are loading. It has other parameters such as index column, then parse date. So if you want to do some spatial processing to dates, then you can use parse dates argument. Now let's do the reverse operation, which is writing data from data frame into SQL table. Okay, so I have this CSV file where I have a list of customers. You can see that I have all these beautiful customers, happy customers who have provided their data along with their phone number, and I want to load them into my SQL table. So the first thing I will do is I will read that CSV and load the data into a data frame. So the name of the CSV is customers.csv. okay, and this is the data frame I get. Now I want to write that back into SQL table. Now one problem is the column names here are different than what I have in my SQL table. Here it says customer space name and customer space phone, whereas in my SQL table my column names are name and phone number. So one thing you have to do is rename the data frame columns to be the same as SQL column names. Okay, and you can do that easily by using df.rename function. Okay, and here you can pass it what kind of renaming you want to do. Okay, so I want to rename customer name to be name, and then customer phone to be phone number. And one most important thing is you have to do in place equal to true. Okay, if you don't want to do in place equal to true, then you have to do this. Okay, this is a very common mistake that people make. Now my data frame is renamed. The column names, you can see they are renamed to be the same as what I have in my SQL table. Now I can use toSQL method to write this back to table. Now let's look at the parameter name. So in toSQL, the parameters you need to supply is, the first thing is name of the SQL table. Okay, so my name of the SQL table is customers. So name is customer. Connection is the same SQL Alchemy engine that I created, which has an interface with the SQL table. And then the other parameter I need to give is index. So I'm not going to write this index 0 to 5. You can see that is an index here. I don't want to write that to my SQL table, and for that reason I will say index equal to false. And the last parameter I would give is if exist. So if exist parameter says that, see, this is very important. If you already have a table that has some records, and if you want to append, then you need to pass if exist value to be append. If you want to remove all the records and insert the new batch, then you would say replace. And if your table exists, then you want to fail, then set the value to be fail. Okay, default value is fail, so I want to change that to append. Okay, So now what I'm doing is I'm writing all these records into my customer table. And before doing that, let me show you that my customers table has only 3 records right now: Donald, Bill, and Modi. And now I'm going to write all these records using toSQL method. When I execute it, looks like it worked okay. So let me rerun this query. So just rerun the query, and good job. See, you see all these new records present in the table. One last thing to mention is that there is a read SQL method as well, which is nothing but a convenient wrapper around read SQL query and read SQL table. So if you read the documentation of this read SQL method, it will say that it is just a wrapper around these two functions. So what you can do is you can do similar thing as read SQL table, where you can read the table by the table name. So if I just say customers and engine, and if I do this, it is actually PD. So it will read the customers table, as you can see here. And in the same function, you can also supply a query. So instead of customer, I can supply a query, and the query is this, and that will also work. So when you supply a query, it internally will execute a read SQL query, and when you supply first parameter as a SQL table name, it will internally execute table. So again, read SQL just provides you a convenience over those two methods. Okay, so that's all I had for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I have provided a link of this Jupyter notebook in the video description below, so feel free to download it and change it